The truth has a strange way of returning when everyone believes it has already been buried. Michael Bennett sat alone at the defense table with both hands resting quietly on a worn leather folder that contained every document he had managed to gather over the past 3 months. The courtroom carried the familiar stillness that settled over every important hearing just before the judge entered. Rows of polished wooden benches were already filled with attorneys, reporters, company executives, and curious spectators who had come to watch what many believed would become another easy victory for one of the largest construction corporations in the state. Michael wore the only charcoal suit he owned, pressed carefully the night before, though the sleeves had begun to show the gentle signs of age. His silver wedding band remained on his finger even though his wife had been gone for more than 20 years. It reminded him that promises did not disappear simply because life became difficult. Outside the tall courthouse windows, a cold autumn wind carried yellow leaves across the courthouse steps, while gray clouds drifted slowly above the city skyline. Inside, every quiet sound seemed louder than usual. The turning of legal papers echoed softly. A pen rolled across a wooden desk before someone caught it. The courtroom clerk adjusted several folders with practiced precision. Michael looked toward the empty judge's bench without the slightest trace of anger or fear. He had spent his entire life repairing broken electrical systems inside schools, churches, family homes, and community buildings. Honest work had taught him something valuable long before he ever stepped into a courtroom. A person's character was never revealed when life was comfortable. It appeared only when everything important seemed ready to disappear. The corporation accusing Michael claimed he had deliberately refused to certify electrical inspections for a major residential development, causing expensive delays that allegedly cost millions of dollars. Their attorneys insisted he had acted irresponsibly. Michael insisted he had simply refused to sign paperwork that declared unsafe wiring acceptable for families who would eventually live there. He had been offered generous compensation to approve the project anyway. He quietly declined. Weeks later, the lawsuit arrived. Friends encouraged him to settle. Former co-workers advised him to protect himself before the legal costs destroyed everything he owned. Michael thanked every one of them before making the same answer each time. If telling the truth became too expensive, then honesty would eventually belong only to wealthy people. He could not allow himself to believe that. Across the aisle, 3 corporate attorneys reviewed thick binders filled with carefully organized exhibits, while executives whispered confidently among themselves. They occasionally glanced toward Michael with expressions that suggested the outcome had already been decided. Michael noticed their confidence, but refused to let it disturb his peace. He had learned years ago that loud certainty often disappeared the moment quiet truth finally entered the room. The courtroom doors opened. Everyone immediately stood. The bailiff announced the arrival of the presiding judge in a steady professional voice. A woman wearing the traditional black judicial robe stepped through the doorway carrying a neatly organized case file against one arm. Her posture reflected years of discipline. Her expression revealed neither warmth nor judgment, only calm impartiality. She climbed the steps toward the bench without looking directly at anyone. Then she opened the file. Her eyes moved across the first page. She read the name of the defendant silently before lifting her gaze toward the courtroom. Time seemed to stop. Michael looked up out of simple respect for the court. Their eyes met across the room. Something changed instantly. The judge's composed expression softened for the briefest heartbeat before returning to perfect professionalism. Michael felt the air leave his lungs. Those blue eyes. That quiet determination. The small scar near her left eyebrow that had come from falling off a bicycle when she was 9 years old. He knew them. He knew her. Emily Harper. The little girl who had once hidden behind library shelves at a children's home because she believed nobody would ever choose her. She recognized him at the very same moment. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the edge of the case file before she carefully placed it upon the bench. No one else in the courtroom noticed the silent storm passing between them. The attorneys continued arranging papers. The reporters prepared notebooks. The spectators waited for the hearing to begin. Only 2 people understood that fate had quietly reunited a father and the daughter he had once rescued from a life of loneliness. And now the law required both of them to pretend they were complete strangers. The courtroom remained perfectly still, Yet inside Emily Harper's heart, an entire lifetime had awakened in a single unforgettable moment. Years of judicial discipline prevented even the slightest change in her expression as she looked across the courtroom at the quiet man seated beside the defense table. To everyone else, he was simply Michael Bennett, the defendant in a civil lawsuit. To her, he was the man who had once changed the direction of her entire life with one impossible act of kindness. She lowered her eyes to the case file before speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Good morning. Please be seated." The attorneys settled into their chairs while court reporters prepared their keyboards. Michael followed every instruction with the same respectful composure he had shown throughout his life. He understood immediately that Emily could not acknowledge him. The courtroom demanded complete impartiality, and he would never place her integrity in jeopardy. As opening procedures began, Michael's thoughts quietly drifted backward more than 20 years to another autumn morning that had looked remarkably similar. Back then he was 32 years old, recently widowed, raising his 7-year-old son Ethan alone while working long days as an electrical contractor throughout the county. Life had become a careful balance between repairing aging electrical systems during daylight hours and helping Ethan with homework after dinner before quietly paying bills late into the night. Money remained tight, but their small home always felt warm because laughter never depended upon expensive things. One Saturday morning, Michael volunteered to repair outdated wiring inside St. Matthew Community Children's Home after learning the building could not afford licensed electrical work. The director apologized repeatedly for being unable to pay him, but Michael simply smiled and said that safe lights for children were worth more than another paycheck. While replacing old ceiling fixtures in the library, he noticed a little girl sitting alone behind one of the bookshelves. She held an old hardcover novel against her chest, as though it were something precious. Most children glanced curiously at the visitor carrying tools. She barely looked up. During lunch, the other children gathered together in the dining hall, while the little girl quietly remained near the library window reading. Michael asked one of the caregivers whether she was feeling ill. The caregiver shook her head gently. "That is Emily," she said softly. "She has been here for almost 3 years. Families usually ask about younger children first." She stopped expecting anyone to choose her. Those words stayed with Michael throughout the afternoon as he finished replacing electrical panels and testing emergency lighting. Every time he walked past the library, Emily remained in exactly the same chair with another book resting across her knees. Before leaving, Michael thanked the staff and carried his toolbox toward the front entrance. Just before reaching the door, he noticed a colorful drawing hanging on the bulletin board. Every child had been asked to draw the home they dreamed of one day. Most pictures showed swimming pools, large backyards, or enormous houses. Emily's drawing showed something entirely different. A small wooden table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf, a lamp glowing beside an open window. Beneath the picture she had carefully written in uneven handwriting, "I hope somebody saves me a place at dinner." Michael stood quietly in front of that drawing much longer than he intended. That evening, he placed a frozen pizza into the oven while Ethan finished a school science project at the kitchen table. After dinner, Michael showed his son the photograph he had taken of the drawing, because something about it refused to leave his thoughts. Ethan studied it silently before asking one simple question. "Does she really eat alone every night?" Michael nodded. Ethan looked back at the picture again. "Mom always said nobody should have to wonder if they belong somewhere." Michael felt an unexpected ache in his chest. His late wife had believed every child deserved a home filled with kindness rather than perfection. Ethan carefully pushed the photograph back across the table. "Dad," he said quietly, "our table has one empty chair." Michael looked toward that empty chair where his wife had once shared every family meal. The house suddenly felt different, not because it had become larger, but because Hope had quietly walked through the front door disguised as a little girl holding a library book. Michael Bennett did not sleep much that night. After Ethan quietly went upstairs, the little photograph of Emily's drawing remained on the kitchen table beneath the warm glow of a single lamp. The empty chair beside the table seemed to carry a different meaning now. For years it had reminded him of the wife he still missed every day. Tonight it also represented the possibility of giving another child the one thing she wanted more than anything else in the world. The following Monday, he returned to St. Matthew Community Children's Home with a folder filled with adoption paperwork he had requested over the weekend. The director welcomed him warmly, but looked genuinely surprised when he explained why he had come back. "You understand this process is not easy," she said carefully. Michael nodded. "Nothing worthwhile ever is." She studied him for a quiet moment before leading him toward the library. Emily sat in the very same corner with another novel resting in her lap. She glanced up when she heard footsteps, but quickly lowered her eyes again, assuming another visitor had come to look around before leaving forever. Michael pulled out the chair across from her instead of standing over her. "What are you reading?" he asked gently. Emily held up the worn book without saying a word. "It is about a girl searching for home." Michael smiled softly. "Do you like stories with happy endings?" She shrugged. "Books can have them." Her answer carried far more honesty than bitterness. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Real life can surprise people too." During the following weeks, the adoption process unfolded one careful step at a time. Home inspections, interviews, financial reviews, background checks, and countless documents filled every spare hour between electrical service calls. Michael answered every question honestly. He never pretended life would be perfect. He simply promised that no child under his roof would ever wonder whether she belonged. Ethan attended every family interview with quiet enthusiasm. When the social worker asked whether he wanted a sister, he smiled and answered, "I already decided that the empty chair should not stay empty forever." Emily listened from across the room, uncertain whether she should believe what she was hearing. Years inside the children's home had taught her that hope could disappear without warning. Even after the final approval arrived, she packed her small suitcase slowly, almost expecting someone to tell her there had been a mistake. She owned very little. 3 well-read library books the director allowed her to keep. A stuffed rabbit missing one button eye. 2 framed photographs of people she barely remembered. A blue sweater she wore whenever she felt nervous. Michael carried her suitcase to the truck while Ethan climbed into the back seat beside her. The drive home passed quietly through neighborhoods glowing beneath late afternoon sunshine. Emily watched families mowing lawns, children riding bicycles, and neighbors waving across front porches. Ordinary moments looked almost unbelievable to someone who had spent years wondering where she belonged. When they finally stopped in front of the small white house with blue shutters, Michael opened the front door and stepped aside. "Welcome home," he said simply. Emily stood frozen for several seconds. No one had ever spoken those words directly to her before. Inside the house, she discovered exactly what she had drawn years earlier without realizing it. A modest wooden dining table. 3 chairs already waiting. A bookshelf beside a window filled with afternoon light. Ethan smiled proudly. Dad built the bookshelf himself. Michael reached into his toolbox resting near the hallway and removed one smooth piece of maple wood. He had carved 4 simple words into its surface the night before. Emily's place at dinner. He fastened the small plaque beneath the edge of the table where only someone sitting there would notice it. Emily slowly ran her fingertips across the carved letters before looking up at Michael. Tears filled her eyes, but she never tried to hide them. Michael knelt beside her chair and spoke with the quiet certainty that had guided every important decision in his life. "You never have to earn your place here. You already have it." Ethan reached across the table and placed a grilled cheese sandwich onto her plate before pouring tomato soup into a bowl. The meal itself was simple, but to Emily it felt richer than any feast she could have imagined. As evening sunlight drifted through the window and settled across the little wooden table, a lonely house quietly became a family, and none of them realized that one ordinary dinner would eventually shape the future of a courtroom many years later. Years passed with the quiet rhythm of ordinary life, and that ordinary life became the greatest gift Michael Bennett could have given either of his children. Every morning before sunrise, he loaded his service truck with electrical equipment, checked each tool with practiced hands, and drove toward another day of repairing schools, churches, family homes, and community centers throughout the county. He never became wealthy, but he never returned home ashamed of how he earned a living. Ethan grew into a dependable young man who inherited his father's calm nature, while Emily discovered that the small bookshelf beside the dining room window became her favorite place in the house. Books no longer served only as places to escape loneliness. They became bridges toward a future she had once believed belonged only to other children. Michael never demanded perfect grades. He never measured success by trophies or awards. Instead, every evening they gathered around the same wooden table where 3 Simple chairs had slowly collected years of shared meals, birthday candles, homework assignments, holiday conversations, and quiet prayers before dinner. Whenever either child faced disappointment, Michael repeated the same gentle reminder. Character is built one honest decision at a time. Those words settled deeply inside Emily's heart long before she fully understood them. During high school, she developed an unusual fascination with the law after watching a volunteer attorney speak during career day. The attorney explained that every courtroom depended upon ordinary people who respected truth even when truth was inconvenient. Emily immediately thought about Michael refusing extra payment for work he had not completed, returning wallets people accidentally left behind, and correcting invoices whenever customers mistakenly overpaid him. Justice suddenly became more than legal language. It became another form of everyday honesty. One autumn afternoon, she arrived home carrying an acceptance letter from one of the state's most respected law schools. Her hands trembled as she walked through the front door. Michael was repairing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen while Ethan prepared spaghetti for dinner. Emily silently placed the unopened envelope on the table beside the familiar plaque that still read Emily's place at dinner. Michael looked at the university seal before smiling. "Would you like me to open it?" Emily shook her head. "I want you to read it first." He carefully unfolded the letter while afternoon sunlight streamed through the window onto the old wooden table. His eyes moved slowly across the page before stopping near the bottom. For several quiet seconds he said nothing. Emily felt her heart race. Finally, Michael looked up with tears quietly gathering in his eyes. "They would be honored to have you," he said softly. Ethan laughed with excitement and wrapped his sister in a proud embrace, while Michael simply stood there smiling, unable to find words large enough for the moment. That evening they celebrated with homemade apple pie from the neighborhood bakery, because expensive restaurants had never defined important occasions in their family before. Leaving for college several weeks later, Emily found Michael alone in the garage carefully repairing one of his old toolboxes. "Dad?" she asked gently, "why did you choose me?" Michael paused before answering. "I did not choose you because I thought I could change your life." He closed the toolbox and looked at her with quiet warmth. "I chose you because you already deserved a family before anyone noticed." Emily carried those words with her through every lecture, every late-night study session, every difficult examination, and every internship inside crowded legal offices. She graduated near the top of her class, became a respected attorney, and years later earned appointment as one of the youngest judges in the region. Despite the demanding schedule, she never allowed a single week to pass without calling home. Sometimes the conversations lasted an hour, sometimes only a few minutes between hearings. Michael always answered with the same familiar greeting that had welcomed her home years earlier. "How is my little girl today?" Emily always smiled, no matter how difficult the day had been. Meanwhile, Michael continued climbing ladders, repairing electrical systems, and quietly serving neighborhoods that rarely knew how much integrity lived beneath his worn work boots. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, an official certified envelope arrived in his mailbox. He opened it at the kitchen table beneath the old reading lamp while thunder rolled softly outside. The document informed him that one of the largest development corporations in the state had filed a civil lawsuit after he refused to certify electrical inspections on a newly completed housing project. Michael folded the papers carefully and looked toward the bookshelf beside the window where Emily had once spent countless evenings reading about justice. He quietly realized that every lesson he had taught his daughter about honesty was about to demand the greatest test of his own life. Rain continued tapping softly against the kitchen window long after Michael Bennett folded the lawsuit back into its envelope and placed it beside the familiar wooden plaque that still read Emily's place at dinner. The old house remained peaceful despite the uncertainty that had suddenly entered it. Ethan, now a successful high school science teacher living only a few miles away, arrived that evening carrying a container of homemade chicken soup after noticing his father's missed phone call. He immediately sensed something was wrong. Michael quietly handed him the legal documents without saying a word. Ethan read each page carefully before placing them back on the table. "They are asking for enough money to take everything you own," he said softly. Michael nodded. "That appears to be the plan." Ethan looked directly at his father. "You can still settle. Nobody would blame you." Michael smiled gently, the same calm smile his children had known since childhood. If I sign a report saying dangerous wiring is safe, families will trust walls that could fail them someday. My name has been worth more than money for 40 years. I cannot sell it now. The following morning, Michael reported to the construction site one final time after receiving permission from his attorney to collect personal tools stored inside the unfinished development. Rows of newly built homes stretched across the hillside beneath gray skies. Fresh paint covered the walls, trimmed lawns surrounded each property, and colorful sales banners promised perfect family living. Everything looked beautiful from the outside. Michael quietly entered one empty home where he had performed inspections weeks earlier. He still remembered opening electrical panels and discovering improperly installed wiring hidden behind finished drywall. When he refused to approve the inspection, a senior executive had invited him into a private office overlooking the development. The executive had spoken politely while sliding an envelope across the polished desk. "Nobody wants unnecessary delays," he had said with an easy smile. "Sign the certification today and consider this a gesture of appreciation for your flexibility." Michael never touched the envelope. Instead, he pushed it gently back across the desk. "Families will eventually raise children inside these homes," he replied calmly. "Electricity does not care about profit margins. It only follows the truth." The executive's smile disappeared. "You are making a very expensive mistake." Michael answered quietly. "Only if I forget who I am." Days later, his inspection contract was terminated. 2 weeks after that, the corporation announced publicly that Michael's alleged negligence had caused millions of dollars in construction delays. The lawsuit followed soon afterward. News spread quickly throughout the local business community. Some former clients quietly stopped calling, worried about becoming involved. Others offered encouragement behind closed doors, but hesitated to speak publicly against such a powerful corporation. Michael never criticized any of them. Fear often convinced good people to remain silent, and he understood that better than most. Late one afternoon, his longtime friend and fellow electrician Thomas Reynolds stopped by the workshop carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. After listening carefully to the entire situation, Thomas leaned against the old workbench where Michael had spent decades repairing lamps, restoring antique fixtures, and teaching neighborhood teenagers basic electrical safety during summer weekends. "You know they are counting on one thing," Thomas said. Michael nodded. "That I will become tired before they become honest." Thomas smiled faintly. "Exactly." Michael looked around the familiar workshop where every tool rested exactly where years of habit had placed it. "Then I suppose I should stay patient." Meanwhile, across the city inside the courthouse, Emily Harper reviewed next week's docket in preparation for several upcoming civil hearings assigned through the court's normal scheduling system. She worked methodically, reading each file with the same careful attention she believed every citizen deserved. Near the bottom of one thick folder, she noticed the name Michael Bennett. Her heart stopped for an instant. She opened the case summary again, hoping she had misread it. The complaint described an electrical inspector accused of causing financial damages after refusing to certify a residential project. Emily immediately recognized both the name and the circumstances. She understood exactly why Michael would refuse to sign. Any report he believed endangered innocent families. For several long moments, she remained completely still inside her quiet chambers. Judicial ethics required fairness above every personal relationship. Her responsibility to the law stood beside her gratitude to the man who had given her a home. She slowly closed the file and rested both hands upon it, realizing that before long, she would have to walk into a courtroom where 2 of the greatest obligations of her life would stand silently facing one another. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the tall courthouse windows as attorneys, witnesses, and spectators gradually filled every seat inside the courtroom. The polished oak benches reflected the golden light, while quiet conversations faded into respectful silence. Michael Bennett sat once again at the defense table, wearing the same carefully pressed charcoal suit. He had slept very little the night before, yet there were no signs of panic in his expression. He quietly organized his documents, straightened the edges of each page, and rested his weathered hands upon the familiar leather folder he had carried since the lawsuit began. Across the room, the corporation's legal team appeared confident. 3 experienced attorneys reviewed thick binders while company executives exchanged relaxed smiles, convinced that overwhelming financial resources and carefully prepared arguments would secure another favorable outcome. Michael noticed their confidence, but felt no resentment. Throughout his career, electricity had taught him one simple lesson. Hidden problems eventually revealed themselves, no matter how carefully someone tried to conceal them. Inside her private chambers, Emily Harper stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of her judicial robe. Her face remained calm, yet her thoughts moved between two responsibilities that mattered more than anything else in her life. One belonged to the law she had sworn to uphold without fear or favor. The other belonged to the father who had once looked at a lonely little girl and decided she deserved a place at his dinner table before she had done anything to earn it. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering his quiet voice repeating the words that had guided her entire career. Character is built one honest decision at a time. When she opened her eyes again, the uncertainty had disappeared. Michael had never raised her to expect special treatment. He had raised her to expect justice. The courtroom doors opened. Everyone immediately rose as the bailiff announced the arrival of the court. Emily entered with composed professionalism, carrying the case file against one arm exactly as every judge before her had done. She neither hurried nor hesitated. From the moment she took her seat behind the bench, every personal memory remained carefully locked behind years of judicial discipline. She looked across the courtroom without lingering on any face before speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Good morning. Please be seated." Chairs moved quietly as everyone followed her instruction. Michael lifted his eyes only long enough to acknowledge the bench before returning his attention to the documents before him. Neither father nor daughter allowed the slightest hint of recognition to appear. To everyone watching, they were simply a judge and a defendant brought together by ordinary legal procedure. Emily reviewed several preliminary motions before inviting opening statements. The corporation's lead attorney stood confidently and spoke at length about financial losses, construction delays, breached contractual obligations, and alleged professional negligence. Charts appeared on display screens. Timelines filled the courtroom monitors. Every presentation suggested that Michael alone had caused millions of dollars in damages through unreasonable refusal to certify completed electrical inspections. When the attorney finally returned to his seat, Emily turned toward Michael with the same impartial expression she had maintained since entering the room. "Mr. Bennett," she said respectfully, "you have chosen to represent yourself. You may proceed with your opening statement." Several spectators exchanged uncertain glances. Representing oneself against a powerful corporate legal team seemed almost impossible. Michael rose slowly, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the simple wooden podium. He carried no dramatic presentation and displayed no elaborate charts. He placed one inspection report upon the podium before looking toward the bench. "Your Honor," he began quietly, "I have repaired electrical systems for more than 4 decades. Every inspection I have signed has carried one promise. Families deserve to believe that the walls surrounding their children are safe." His voice remained steady. "This case is not about money. It is about whether an inspector should approve work he honestly believes could place innocent people at unnecessary risk." The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Michael continued without raising his voice. "I am not asking the court to trust my opinion simply because it belongs to me. I am asking the court to examine the evidence carefully and let the truth speak for itself." He returned to his seat without another word. Emily made a brief note inside the file before looking toward the witness list prepared by both parties. Her expression remained perfectly composed, yet when she reached the final page her eyes paused for the briefest moment. A late addition had been approved only hours earlier. The first witness scheduled to testify that afternoon was someone neither side had expected to appear, and Emily quietly realized that the course of the entire trial might be about to change. The courtroom settled into an even deeper silence as Judge Emily Harper looked toward the courtroom clerk and announced the first witness. "The court calls Thomas Reynolds." A tall, gray-haired electrician wearing a neatly pressed work shirt stepped forward with measured confidence. After taking the oath, he settled into the witness chair and folded his weathered hands together. Michael recognized his longtime friend immediately, but showed no outward reaction beyond a quiet nod. Thomas had spent nearly 30 years working alongside Michael on schools, churches, libraries, and community projects throughout the county. If anyone understood Michael's professional standards, it was the man now preparing to testify. The corporation's lead attorney approached first, maintaining the same polished confidence that had filled the courtroom all morning. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, "would you agree that delays on major construction projects often create significant financial losses?" Thomas answered calmly, "Yes." The attorney smiled slightly. "Then would you also agree that an inspector has a responsibility to avoid unnecessary delays whenever possible?" Thomas looked directly toward the witness stand microphone before replying. "An inspector has a greater responsibility to protect the families who will eventually live inside those homes." A faint murmur passed through the gallery before fading just as quickly. The attorney continued, "But mistakes happen. Professional judgment is not always perfect." Thomas nodded. "That is true. So Mr. Bennett could have been mistaken." Thomas remained composed. "Anyone can make a mistake. That is why evidence matters." Emily listened without interruption, making careful notes while maintaining the same impartial expression expected of every judge. She neither encouraged nor discouraged either side. The law deserved nothing less. The attorney shifted strategies. "Did you personally inspect every electrical system involved in this lawsuit?" "No." "Then how can you defend Mr. Bennett's conclusions?" Thomas reached into the folder he had brought with him. "Because after Michael's inspection was rejected, I was hired by another subcontractor to repair several sections before the project reopened." He carefully removed a series of photographs and inspection reports. These were taken before the repairs. The courtroom clerk distributed copies to counsel and the bench. High-resolution photographs revealed electrical panels with improperly secured wiring, overloaded junction boxes, and safety violations documented with dates and inspection references. Every image matched concerns Michael had described months earlier. The corporation's attorneys immediately examined the documents with noticeably greater urgency than before. Thomas continued in the same steady voice. Every issue identified by Michael was eventually corrected. The repair invoices are attached behind the photographs. Emily quietly reviewed the supporting documentation while the courtroom remained almost completely silent. The attorney attempted one final challenge. "Is it possible these repairs were simply precautionary improvements?" Thomas shook his head. "No. They were mandatory corrections required before the project could receive final approval." The confidence that had surrounded the plaintiff's table throughout the morning began to soften. One executive leaned toward another, whispering quietly while reviewing the exhibits. Michael remained perfectly still, never looking toward them. He had waited patiently for the truth because he believed truth rarely needed dramatic entrances. It only needed an opportunity to be heard. After a brief recess, the defense introduced additional documentary evidence. Michael presented copies of emails requesting independent reinspection, written recommendations describing necessary corrections, and signed records showing he had repeatedly offered to return after repairs were completed. Every document had been ignored. Instead, the corporation had replaced him with another inspector before filing the lawsuit. Emily examined each exhibit carefully, asking concise procedural questions that reflected thorough preparation rather than personal familiarity. Every answer strengthened the same simple conclusion. Michael had followed professional standards exactly as required. He had refused to certify work that failed to meet safety regulations, and subsequent repairs confirmed his original findings. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the courtroom had changed completely. The spectators who had entered expecting another routine corporate victory now watched with quiet attention as the evidence steadily reshaped the narrative. No raised voices echoed across the courtroom. No emotional outbursts interrupted the proceedings. Only documented facts, patient testimony, and quiet integrity gradually illuminated what pride had tried to conceal. As the final witness stepped down, Emily organized the growing stack of exhibits before her. She looked across the courtroom and announced that closing arguments would begin the following morning before the court rendered its decision. The bailiff adjourned the session, and everyone slowly rose from their seats. Michael carefully gathered his worn leather folder exactly as he had at the beginning of the day. Across the courtroom, Emily closed the case file with calm hands. Yet she knew the evidence now resting inside those pages had done far more than defend one honest electrician. It had restored the truth her father had protected long before either of them walked through the courthouse doors. The following morning, the courthouse filled once again with quiet anticipation as sunlight poured through the tall windows, and settled gently across polished wooden floors. Reporters arranged their notebooks. Attorneys reviewed final arguments one last time. Spectators whispered softly before the bailiff called for order. Michael Bennett sat calmly at the defense table, wearing the same charcoal suit that had carried him through every day of the trial. His leather folder rested neatly beside him, though he barely opened it now. Everything that needed to be said had already been placed into evidence. Across the courtroom, the corporation's executives appeared far less confident than they had only 2 days earlier. Their conversations had become shorter, their smiles less certain, and every glance toward the judge's bench carried a quiet sense of unease. Inside her chambers, Emily Harper stood alone for a brief moment before the hearing resumed. She carefully reviewed every exhibit one final time. Inspection reports, repair invoices, photographs, independent testimony, email correspondence. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion. Michael Bennett had fulfilled every professional obligation required by law. He had refused to compromise public safety despite enormous pressure to do otherwise. Emily closed the case file gently and rested both hands upon it. Years earlier, the man waiting in the courtroom had taught her that integrity often required standing alone. Today, the law required her to prove she had learned that lesson without allowing personal gratitude to influence a single word of her decision. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors and announced the court. Everyone immediately stood. Emily entered with composed professionalism and took her place. Behind the bench, her expression revealed neither satisfaction nor sympathy. It reflected only careful responsibility. After confirming that both parties were present, she invited brief closing arguments. The corporation's attorney spoke first, attempting to minimize the significance of the repair records by arguing that construction projects frequently evolved after inspections. He emphasized financial losses, contractual obligations, and business expectations. When he finished, Michael quietly approached the podium one final time. He looked neither toward the executives nor toward the spectators. Instead, he spoke directly to the court. "Your Honor, every electrician eventually learns that hidden problems remain hidden only until someone turns on the lights. My responsibility has never been to protect schedules or profits. My responsibility has always been to protect the families who trust that a signed inspection means their children are safe inside their own homes. If refusing to ignore a danger created inconvenience, then I accept that inconvenience with gratitude." He thanked the court and calmly returned to his seat. A profound silence settled across the courtroom as Emily opened the written decision before her. Her voice remained steady and deliberate. After careful review of all testimony, documentary evidence, inspection records, repair invoices, and applicable law, this court finds that the defendant acted within both professional standards and legal obligations. The evidence clearly demonstrates that the electrical deficiencies identified during inspection required correction before certification. Subsequent repairs independently confirm the accuracy of those findings. Accordingly, judgment is entered in favor of the defendant, and all claims against Mr. Michael Bennett are dismissed. No applause interrupted the courtroom. No celebration disturbed the dignity of the proceedings. Instead, an extraordinary stillness spread through every row of seats. Several reporters slowly lowered their pens. The corporation's attorneys quietly closed their binders without argument. One executive stared silently toward the floor, realizing that truth had quietly outlasted influence. Emily concluded the formal session with the customary instructions before lifting the small wooden gavel. "This matter is concluded." The sound echoed softly across the courtroom. Everyone remained seated for a brief moment before the bailiff officially announced adjournment. Emily rose from the bench and disappeared through the chamber door exactly as judicial protocol required. Michael carefully gathered his worn leather folder, thanked the courtroom clerk with genuine courtesy, and slowly walked toward the exit. He had taken only a few steps into the now nearly empty hallway when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Dad." Michael stopped instantly. He turned to see Emily no longer wearing the black judicial robe. She now stood in a simple navy business suit, her eyes glistening with quiet emotion she had held back throughout the entire trial. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Emily crossed the hallway and wrapped both arms around the man who had once carried her small suitcase into a home where an empty chair had been waiting just for her. Michael embraced her with the same gentle warmth that had welcomed her on her first evening as part of the family. Lawyers, court staff, deputies, and visitors passing through the hallway quietly stopped walking. No one interrupted the moment. No one looked away. Every person who witnessed that embrace understood they were seeing something far greater than the end of a lawsuit. They were witnessing a lifetime of quiet sacrifice returning home through justice, gratitude, and the enduring love between a father and the daughter who never forgot who first saved her a place at the dinner table. Several months passed after the trial, and life quietly returned to the steady rhythm Michael Bennett had always loved. Before sunrise each morning, he still unlocked the small workshop behind his house, switched on the familiar lights, and carefully arranged his tools before driving to another day of honest electrical work. The lawsuit had ended, but it had never changed the man who stood beneath those work lights every morning. Neighbors greeted him exactly as they always had. Church members still called whenever an elderly couple needed a faulty outlet repaired or a community center required new lighting before an evening event. Michael accepted every job with the same quiet gratitude because he had never believed dignity depended upon recognition. It depended upon consistency. Emily Harper returned to the courthouse carrying the same calm professionalism that had defined her career long before fate reunited her with the father who had raised her. Every morning, she entered her courtroom through the same wooden doors, placed her case files neatly upon the bench, and reminded herself that every person deserved to be heard with fairness and respect. The trial involving Michael was never mentioned publicly beyond the official court record. Emily insisted it remain that way because justice should never become a performance. What mattered was not that her father had stood before her bench. What mattered was that the law had protected the truth exactly as it was designed to do. Ethan often visited the workshop after finishing classes at the high school where he taught science. Together, the three of them slowly completed projects they had postponed for years. They built picnic tables for the neighborhood park, bookshelves for the public library, and study desks donated anonymously to children whose families could not afford new furniture. Michael refused to place his name on any of the finished pieces. He simply smiled whenever someone thanked him and replied that good work spoke well enough for itself. One cool Saturday afternoon, Emily arrived carrying an old cardboard box she had discovered while organizing documents in her home office. Dust covered the lid, but inside rested carefully preserved memories from childhood. There was the faded blue sweater she had worn on the day Michael first brought her home. There was the stuffed rabbit with one missing button eye. There were school report cards, family photographs, birthday cards signed by Ethan, and dozens of handwritten notes Michael had quietly slipped into her lunchbox before important exams. At the very bottom lay the small photograph Michael had taken years earlier of a child's drawing pinned to the bulletin board inside St. Matthew Community Children's Home. Emily carefully unfolded it and smiled through quiet tears. The picture still showed the little wooden table with 3 chairs and the simple sentence written beneath it. "I hope somebody saves me a place at dinner." Michael looked at the faded photograph for a long moment before gently placing it beside the handcrafted plaque that still rested beneath the edge of the dining room table. Emily's place at dinner. Time had worn the edges smooth, but the carved letters remained clear. That evening, Ethan prepared grilled chicken, while Emily baked fresh bread from their late mother's handwritten recipe. Michael carried bowls of homemade soup to the table exactly as he had done countless evenings before. Nothing about the meal appeared extraordinary. The dishes did not match perfectly. The chairs carried small scratches collected over decades. The old reading lamp beside the bookshelf still leaned slightly to one side because Michael insisted it added character instead of needing replacement. Yet to everyone sitting around that table, no mansion could have felt richer. As the evening sunlight drifted gently through the window, Emily looked around the room that had once existed only inside the imagination of a lonely little girl. The bookshelf stood exactly where she had drawn it. The lamp still glowed beside the open window. 3 chairs had become 4 as the family quietly grew through the years, yet one truth remained unchanged. Home had never been a place built from expensive materials. It had always been built by someone willing to leave an empty chair waiting for another heart. Michael folded his hands before dinner and quietly gave thanks, not for the victory in court, not for public recognition, and not for the hardships that had shaped their journey, but for ordinary evenings like this one where love asked for nothing and gratitude filled every seat around the table. Outside, autumn leaves drifted gently across the yard, while warm light spilled through the windows of the small white house. Inside, laughter replaced silence, hope replaced loneliness, and a father's simple act of kindness continued, changing lives long after the courtroom had emptied. Sometimes the greatest legacy is never written into legal opinions or newspaper headlines. Sometimes it lives forever in a child who was finally given a place to belong, a family that chose character above comfort, and a dinner table where one empty chair became the beginning of everything.